Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to this session of the Ideas Conclave. I'm Salman Zaidi. I work as the director at Jinnah Institute. I welcome you to all sessions of the Ideas Conclave 2020, which we're holding online this year. And I welcome you particularly to this session, which talks about a theme that has acquired outsized value in our lives, particularly this year, which was one of historic disruptions, and in which the idea of technology and its transformative power is transforming our lives, of course, but had also impacted our ability to project the future. Many of these projections are enabled by technology, and this comes at the very heart of how we predict our potentials, our patterns, or even our longevity. The fact that the internet could be disrupted this year, or the fact that social media apps could lead us to peril, or even that new age technologies could create new modes of violence and conflict in our societies, speaks to states and societies that are not yet tech fluent, of states that do not get how stuff wrong, who do not get how stuff happens, as well as societies who will really embrace, sometimes breathlessly, any resource out there that enhances consumptive power, often at the cost of empathy or reasoning. We've seen that happen across the world, and this has a major intersection with the usage of technology. But while we rebuild our way out of this pandemic, technology will remain the instrumental resource that we use to shine a light on how we can rebuild, repair, reduce losses, reduce vulnerabilities, sustain our ecosystems. Of course, this will be aided by taking a hard look at data where we can. But just as much, governments coming to age with their ability to understand what the internet is, how stuff works, curb their regulatory enthusiasms. And we have also learned in this process that technology is no monolith. It is neither intrinsically good or bad. It's what you make of it. But technology has become and acquired a bad rep as the great divider between those who can imagine a digital future and those who are left behind in the back alleys of internet breakdowns and poor bandwidth. So perhaps over the course of discussion, we will be able to connect these multiple moving, inefficient parts and come to an understanding of connectography, if you like, which is, as we understand, the human capacity to interact and use whatever interneted resources there are. Of course, this connects with geography as well as mobility of citizens. And I'm, in this regard, very happy that we have a set of practitioners with us who have been looking at these issues, and who have worked on both supply and demand sides of the technology issue in Pakistan. I'm happy to have with us Mr. Usama Khilji, who is the director of Bolobhi, Mr. Uwais Anwar, lawyer and director at the Research Society of International Law, Ms. Sadaf Beg, who's been a journalist and the director at Media Matters for Democracy, Mr. Mubariz Siddiqui, who is also a lawyer and general counsel at Sarmaya Kar, and Ms. Sehar Tariq, activist, influencer, and who works with Facebook. So we're talking at a good time, because I do know that there's been a lot of discussion recently with regard to the government's new regulatory framework, and we can talk about that in a little bit. But perhaps we should start with snapshotting first what digital Pakistan looks like. Many of the people listening into this session are not from Pakistan; they're from abroad. So perhaps, Sehar, if I can ask you to describe what digital Pakistan looks like, tell us what stats are, tell us what Facebook's view or the international view on Pakistan is.
Thanks, Salman. So I'd like to begin by, when we think about Pakistan, we think of an immensely populous country, we think of a very young country, and we think of oftentimes a country which is inundated by technology and connectivity. I think the first two things are correct, that we are a very populous country, we are a very young country. But I think when it comes to connectivity, we're not actually such a well connected country. And even though we see the growing influence of technology in our everyday lives, the numbers actually tell a different story. And I think it's a good place to start. And to start off, this is not the Facebook view or the Sehar view. This is an actually independent, impartial view that I'd like to share with you, which is the Economist puts out something which is called the Inclusive Internet Index, the III report. And they look at countries around the world. They also look at it regionally, and they rank how countries rank on readiness, affordability, connectivity, and availability of online resources. So the overall rank for Pakistan on being an internet inclusive country is 76 out of 100. The Economist ranks 100 countries, Pakistan ranks 76. It ranks 24th out of 26 Asian countries. So we are number 24 out of 26 Asian countries. So we're at the bottom when it comes to the numbers for Asia. We're at the very bottom of the pyramid there. And I think that's something we often don't think, because technology has maybe become so pervasive every day in our lives that we think it's everywhere. That's actually not the case, as the Economist will tell you. And if you look at the breakdown, and the reasons why we rank so low is because connectivity infrastructure in Pakistan is poor. So it is about actually getting, not everyone actually has access to the internet. Not even everyone has access to a mobile phone. As well, right? And so I think the numbers that the Pakistan Telecommunication Authority has put out is about between 60 to 70 people that are connected to the internet online. We are a country of 200 million people. So that there is a big difference. The other big differences and why Pakistan ranks poorly, one is because of its infrastructure and network. Two is actually because we have one of the biggest gender gaps in the world. So women are disproportionately do not have access to the internet in Pakistan. We have one of the biggest gender gaps in the world. And the other thing that we are not prepared for, we rank extremely low when it comes to readiness for the internet, which means, are people digitally literate? Do they have the skills required to use the internet to the best of its ability and potential? So when it comes to readiness, we are 64th in the world. When it comes to availability, we are 86th in the world. And so I think a combination of that, we actually, not everyone has access to the internet. And even for people who do have access to the internet, do we have the digital literacy and the tools required to use the internet the way it's supposed to be used, to harness its potential benefits? We're falling behind as a country on those areas. And I think for all those of us who are active on social media, we've seen this manifest in different ways that I think the other panelists can talk about. But I think if we really want to become a connected country, beyond the regulatory frameworks, beyond the infrastructure challenges, we also need to make sure that people are aware of the rules of engagement on the internet, that they are aware of how best to use the internet, and are displaying personally responsible behavior on the internet, because only then can we harness the power of the internet for good. I just like to end by saying I loved what you said in the beginning, that technology, it depends on how you use it. And technology is essentially a reflection of any society, because what's happening offline is what's happening online. And so I think we really need to remember that and think about the social contract that states and citizens have, the civic education systems are in place between citizens and state. And that's the direction we need to move forward in and improve if Pakistan is to fully harness the benefits of being a connected global player.
Thank you, Sehar, for that intervention, as well as bringing up the dichotomy between online and offline. And I think between that gap is where governance really lies. I'd like to ask Usama whether he thinks that during this time of COVID, and this has been a time of upheaval, and which really pointed to the ability of governments to harness the internet, create the internet for creating multipliers, for enabling or facilitating the work of governments, social services in particular. Can you provide any evidence of the social sectors working because of better technology?
Thank you, Salman, and thank you for having me here. I think Sehar's set the stage very well in terms of where we lie globally and what the indicators are. But as far as the social sectors are concerned, so in Pakistan, we've seen a shift in like Sehar mentioned, talking more about technology and pretending like it's pervasive, and that's what we saw in, for example, the education sector. So when the lockdown started in March and a lot of the educational institutes were shut down. So we heard the government say that we're going to have online classes now. And that's where a lot of noise started coming out about lack of internet infrastructure and access. And there's multiple layers to it. So first, we have the regional or geographical layer, where you have many parts of the country where there simply is no internet access for citizens. So I'm talking about the tribal districts of the Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which was the ex-FATA. There's not even mobile connectivity in a lot of the places there, and where there is mobile connectivity, there is no internet connectivity, mobile internet, and these are around 7 districts, which is around roughly 20 million people. And then you come to Balochistan, and there's a lot of districts in Balochistan that do not have internet access at all. And then we come to Gilgit-Baltistan and Chitral also, where internet connectivity is dismal. And how did we really find out about this? Because a lot of the students from these areas come to the bigger cities for education. But then when a lot of the classes went online, the students said, hello, we're going home. The hostels are shut down and we don't have internet access. So I think that's where the importance of internet comes in, and the importance of internet as a right that overlaps with other rights, such as the right to information, the right to freedom of speech, and also the right to education, apart from the right to association. And then the education sector really showed us that. Now, the government did react to that by saying, okay, we're going to hold classes for younger students and have educational material available on television, which is broadcast in every household. But of course, on the television, it's broadcast. Does every household have multiple televisions? Or when we're talking about computers, does every household have computers for access to educational material? So I think there's a few things that are missing and that can be done, and we can learn from other jurisdictions. So for example, the government could work on installing public Wi-Fi hotspots in public areas where internet is available for free for people. And this can especially be done during the day around, where you have a lot of children, a lot of population in the area, and no or little internet access that's not affordable. There's another example that I used where you can, the example of the mobile libraries. So you can have mobile internet stations where you have a vehicle that provides internet that can go from village to village or town to town and start providing these services in areas where it's underserved. But these are just stopgaps. At the end of the day, we need to increase the access and the infrastructure, and there's existing mechanisms available for this. So Pakistan has a universal service fund in which all the telecom operators and internet service providers contribute 1% of their total annual revenue, and that's supposed to be used to extend connectivity, internet access, and telecom access to underserved areas. So I think the government really needs to act on it. And then apart from that, we've seen health services go mobile also, where a lot of hospitals and a lot of services have started providing access to healthcare officials through mobile phones or telephones, because people couldn't really go to hospitals. But of course, that also requires scale, and that requires scale on part of the government also, apart from the private sector. So I think now as we enter the second wave and enter the second lockdown, enter the second shutdown of educational institutes, the government should really start thinking about how it's going to harness technology to benefit citizens in terms of the social sector, in terms of providing services related to education and healthcare. Thank you.
Thank you for that comprehensive overview. Usama, Uwais, I want to come to you because you've been looking at governance from a different angle, and that's really the rule of law sector. You've also been assisting the government in putting together data, in improving procedures. Would you like to reflect from that sector and identify any opportunities as well as challenges going
Absolutely.
forward?
Thank you so much, Salman, for having me, and really happy to be part of this panel. When we're looking at governance through a rule of law lens, we're looking at issues of accountability. We're looking at issues of inclusiveness and how the judiciary plays a role and how the justice sector really functions there, and really a fundamental role of the state as providing justice as a service and delivering justice. That is really impacted by what I would say is the very rudimentary or very early evolution of technology entering this field. And it's certainly ripe for a lot of intervention. Right now, what we have, some of the most serious issues that we have in the justice sector, for example, delays or lack of credibility in criminal investigations, weak capacity of government prosecutors or investigators or judges for that matter. All of these have solutions that are, very viable, very workable, and yet, they haven't been incorporated. And something that what we see is this lack of use of technology or lack of thinking of solutions really has impacted the experience that litigants, common people who have to interface with the judiciary, are suffering from. So, for example, I mean, just this disconnect from technology, what we see is that there's a very different experience that people have at the subordinate judiciary level or at the superior judiciary level, right? Where at the superior judiciary, whether the high courts or the Supreme Court, you have mechanisms for case management. You have an app which tells you when your case is going to be. So it saves a lot of time, and it becomes quite a lot more, excuse me, these buds needed to be changed, but I haven't had the time yet. So what we see really is that there's a significant difference in the experience that people are having. And the problems that arise by there are very much, solvable problems. But within that larger discussion is, if you were to introduce technological solutions here, you are going to have a lot of buy-in from the stakeholders, and that's where we come into the problem. Whether it's lawyers and the issue of delay. What we know from the data is that a big reason for delay is the number of hartals that happen, the strikes that happen by the courts, by the judicial, by the lawyer legal community. And in addition to that, we see not enough judges being able to manage their cases. So bringing in case management or case scheduling mechanisms, that is something that is really lacking there. And one of the biggest opponents to that would be the legal community themselves, because there is a lot of advantage in actually being able to slow down the pace of cases going forward. And that's what the data shows. Similarly, when it comes to criminal investigations, another aspect of the rule of law sector, there is absolutely zero credibility from the judiciary in what the police bring forward to them. We know of, again, what the data shows is a lot of cases, the official term that they use is padding, where cases are made up. They sound very similar. There's boilerplate language used in them because they're, often padded up just because the process is so complex and that the police really can't fulfill all the obligations. And because of that lack of credibility, you have one of the most astronomical acquittal rates around the world in Pakistan. Just we did a study, the homicide conviction rate, murder conviction rate in Karachi, for example, is about less than 7%. And around the country, for numerous offenses, they're really, really low. And the reason is because, again, the judiciary doesn't trust what the police is bringing forward to them. There are mechanisms of ensuring that this credibility can be built in. For example, using simple, geotagged photographs so that you know where evidence was picked up, as opposed to it being concocted and just brought in from the storage. So these are all things that I think, from a tech lens, really is something that we're working on, and something that is ripe for intervention that Pakistan desperately needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Wes. Mubariz, you operate in the corporate space, and there is a lot of stress on ground, particularly among ISPs because of regulatory mechanisms, etc. But there is, we have interacted in the past on technology, and you've been talking about this, that there is a lack of familiarity with tech in the way it can enable businesses, but also, as Wes is pointing out, obstacles created by authorizers, by institutions that monitor this. Could you reflect from this space, particularly the corporate one, on what challenges there are in the field?
Thanks, Salman. Yeah, as Wes and even Usama actually what rightly pointed out, I'll start with how Usama very correctly highlighted technology's use across different fundamental rights, and Wes rightly pointed out how technology can be used to make processes simpler and governance easier. Keeping aside our ability to regulate internet or inability to regulate internet properly. What I want to start by talking about and build up upon is what Uwais was talking about. It's primarily around how technology can be leveraged to improve governance, right? How the government as a service provider can leverage technology to provide a better service. If you just zoom out a bit, and given our current government is quite focused on its anti-corruption drive and accountability drive, what I would actually like to see are systems being made which prevent corruption in the future, right? Now, if I'm going to talk about how fundamentally how corruption happens is when someone has discretionary power and they can exercise that discretion for their own personal gain. Now, how can technology help us, number one, monitor that discretion is being exercised fairly and equitably, and how can technology add transparency to that process? Now, if you pick up all these NAB cases, which don't really make big news, from I mean, sometimes they do, from the Parks and Recreation Department to 3 police wallahs who were doing procurement and took billions away, that's very basic lack of transparency in the process. That those kind of things happen, and those kind of discretionary discretion is abused when there is no accountability and there's no one checking these things. And when everything is on paper, it's very easy to forge records. It's very easy to procure items worth crores without anyone noticing. So there's very obviously a clear use case of technology to combat corruption, quite simply put. However, and that would also tell you what the obstacle of improving or of enabling technology or in these processes is. Now, similarly, when we talk about improving the digital the regulatory space for a digital infrastructure in Pakistan, what we are suffering from are very broad discretionary powers given to very few officers that are part of a regulator, PTA in this case, where the law and the guidelines are so broad. Literally anything can be justified as either obscene, immoral, etc., and be banned or prohibited. Now, what that does is that restricts an ordinary Pakistani who's either producing content online or either producing or making a living online by producing content or digital services to freely pursue whatever it is that they wanted to pursue because of regulatory uncertainty and because of actual abuse of discretionary power. So yeah, I do think a lot can improve by just the government's mindset towards technology being a bit broad, where it can leverage technology itself and which can help leverage Pakistanis and Pakistani businesses leverage technology for their own good as well.
Thank you, Mubariz. Coming to Sadaf. Sadaf, you've spoken and written about the gendered impact of the availability of technology. Coming back to the idea of connectography, whom are we enabling this technology for? Whom are we creating multipliers for? Like Sehar and others have said, technology may be, and particularly the internet, may be available to only some in Pakistan. Who are the some who are taking this forward, and who are those left behind?
Thank you, Salman. I think this question is at the base of everything that's wrong with technological revolution, evolution in Pakistan, because the focus that the government has taken, unfortunately, it has been very much limited. If you look specifically in terms of regulatory policies being evolved for the internet, it has been very much limited to the speech and expression of some people, including maybe journalists, activists, people like us who are privileged and vocal and have, even if we didn't have technology, we have a lot of other avenues to connect and have our say. Who gets left behind and who gets targeted and further marginalized within this equation, where the view for technology that's being taken is to simply create an environment which is more conducive to certain narratives. As Usama was pointing out, if you look at it geographically, Balochistan, the newly merged districts of Fata, are traditionally areas that have been information dark in that sense. So when this selective approach is taken, just in ensuring the internet connection, that's one of the basic things, right? And when you start putting these geographical boundaries, when you start thinking about the political boundaries that exist, the political red lines that exist, and then start using those to define where technology should go, where internet should go, and who should connect and who should not connect, then your whole worldview regarding technology becomes limited to one particular aspect of technological use. And everything else that we have been talking about, what Sehar said, Mubariz said, and Ware said about using technology as a part of processes to inform governance, to improve governance, that gets left behind. We have a number of institutions like the NITB, the IT boards that were established all around the country in all the different regions. The idea was supposed to be enabling government to use technologies in a better way, digitization, incorporation of technological tools within governance processes, within the bureaucracy. However, that has not happened. We are still seeing a lot of clashes. There are turf wars between these national institutions, who get jurisdiction over what, who does what, and who doesn't do what. How do different regions, different provinces connect with the federal? How do they connect with each other? These are all political issues that, because they're not being solved, those who are marginalized become further marginalized, and those who are already connected continue to have access and continue to grow, and then this kind of increases the whole socioeconomic gap, the technological gap within. So it's kind of furthering it, and it's making it deeper. Now, I think the impact could not be more prominent than it has been in COVID, and I think we should see it as something, as an opportunity to learn, because we could not have imagined a situation where the whole of our population would suddenly become so dependent on technological access. So whether it's the point about affordability of devices, whether it's the point about actual physical infrastructural access, or what Sehar was saying about readiness for the internet, I think the idea that the government should be extremely scared and they should be taking emergency measures to ensure that the readiness, specifically infrastructural access, they can become universally applicable. I think the ITU decades back, the idea that telephone connectivity has to be universal was introduced through the ITU, the International Telecommunication Union. And I think the discourse on the need for global universal internet connectivity has also been going on for ages. And right now we are still struggling to catch up. Now, one more aspect that I would like to point out before I wind up is the fact that it's not just the readiness that needs to be thought of, but also a lot of cultural aspects, a lot of other aspects that kind of inform how different people experience the internet. So because the 16 days of activism against gender-based violence are going on, I would highlight the case study for women, but you can also apply the same thing to marginalized communities, to religious minorities per se, to ethnic minorities who are targeted. The challenges apply equally to all the communities that are marginalized, and the challenges include obviously the access part, not just the device, but infrastructure, the ability to use. But then also there's this whole component of surveillance coming through their families, coming through society, and coming through people who are observing their internet activity. So, for example, a woman posting a picture online, whether it's on a tweet, whether it's on her Facebook profile, is much more likely to get scrutinized by her own family, maybe her extended family, and if it's public, by other people. And then the comments and the discourse that happens under that picture, that will define whether her family will continue to allow her to use the internet or not. And then if there is one device in the family, and the sister and the brother both have the online classes, who do you think is going to get access to that device? So these gender norms, the discrimination that happens, that are very inherent in our culture. Unfortunately, even educated families will always ask the sister to serve the brother first and then get her own plate of food. So these very inherent internalized biases, when they kind of translate into what it means to, for what it means for girls to be using technology, how they're using it, whether they're able to access everything they want to, or whether they simply limit what they're exploring for the fear of being monitored and being asked questions, or being accused of using too much data or whatever. So these all factors contribute towards how internet is being experienced. So the discourse on technology, technological access, has to include all these factors, which will eventually impact how technology, when once it's accessed, will be experienced by the majority and the marginalized communities.
I do want to just add one thing here, Salman. I think Sada's point about, access, and especially marginalized communities, is an important one. But I also do want to flag that one of the things that technology has done is really democratize this space, right? So as an example, as some of you might know, I decided that 2020, because this was the year of great catastrophe, I would add to the great catastrophe by becoming an internet influencer myself. So I thought I would try an experiment and see how does one actually become an influencer, what's involved, and what benefits does one get. Because this is something that I am increasingly, as someone who works in this space, I am seeing this happening in Pakistan. And you see people from different socioeconomic strata using the internet in very creative ways to make points heard, to have their say when it comes to governance, to have their say when it comes to big corporations and brands, when it comes to, opinions or setting agendas for the public to discuss, right? And so individuals really now have this power where they are able to develop public discourse, dictate public discourse, and participate in it that they couldn't before. So I do want to say one of the great things, but obviously, there comes with it certain challenges, is the democratization of public discourse, of what people can say, and that is powerful. So from a personal point of view, I can add that, very recently I had an issue where I was trying to solve a very personal problem, administrative problem with the bank that I bank with. And the only way that I was able to get the attention of people, because I didn't know anyone who worked at the bank, I didn't know anyone higher up, I couldn't go to anyone, was that I actually took to social media to air my grievances. And, hey presto, within sort of an hour or two, I had heard back. Now, for an average citizen to be able to have their voice heard by a large corporation was not something that was possible before. Or for an average citizen to have their voice heard by the government, or by any powerful institutions or structures or bodies. I think the internet has also made that possible. And I just want to acknowledge, I think that's an incredibly powerful thing. But that also brings with it incredible social challenges, like Sadaf has pointed out. It has, when it comes to violence, when it comes to things like hate speech, when it comes to things like, gendered norms, like I think all of those things are deeply then connected to this idea of connectography. Like, do we really, are we better off as a connected society? In my view, we definitely are. But I think there might be diverse opinions around this. And I'd be curious to know what other participants think of this.
Thank you for laying that out, Sehar, because that was going to be my next question about the democratization of this space. Sehar, you and I, we speak a particular language. We are extremely interneted, and we might, much of this has to do with our positions of privilege as well. We bring those to bear on our experiences of the internet and the world. But having said this, I do want to ask other panelists what they think about. This does ride on an assumption that technology is good, that the internet is good, and perhaps we need to reach an optimal point of per capita internet availability before we can start second guessing this. I'd like the rest, particularly Usama, to maybe tell us about the negative aspects of technology. We have seen the rise of violence in Pakistan, the rise of harassment, the rise of wholesale trolling online, particularly of women. Those are some of the things that we are seeing now. These are new age problems. How democratic a space do you think technology is making this, or is it bringing our worst tendencies to light?
I think, Salman, I'd like to go back to what Sehar said earlier on, in which he said the internet or social media is a reflection of your society. So I don't think that the online world is particularly different than the real world, so to speak. I think online world is as real as any other world, because it's just people. It's merely a tool. So I don't think, I don't know if we can say whether it's good or bad. It's just the internet, and you use it. It's like, do you use a telephone for good or bad, right? It depends how you use it, who you are. But as far as democracy is concerned, yes, I think you've made me think of a lot of the issues that technology also highlights. So, for example, issues related to misinformation and disinformation on the internet. But again, I'd like to stress that this is not something new. We've had, Fatma Jinnah being called a traitor in the 60s or in the 50s, and an Indian agent, and that was also disinformation. And you've had different disinformation, misinformation campaigns against people. What we're seeing now is that it's well documented. It's on the internet. At first, it was word of mouth. Now you're watching it go through on Twitter or on Facebook or on WhatsApp. And our responses to that also have to be rooted in digital and media literacy. So are you equipped enough to be able to tell that an article that you're reading is real, or is it making up stuff? How do you verify it? And how are you able to tell whether this is new or old? There's a lot of ways on how you can verify it, and people need to be taught how to do that. So I think Sadaf's point about media and digital literacy comes in again, where it needs to be included in the curriculum. And then when Sehar spoke about civic education, that needs to be included in the curriculum, where people are taught how the systems work, how media works, because the media and information technology are increasingly important. But when we're talking about democracy and representation, I think social media and internet have really offered a very important space to Pakistanis that didn't have a voice before, to Pakistanis who were ignored by the media, to Pakistanis from areas where media access was not possible. And it's also given rise to human rights movements. It's given rise to a lot of young people that previously could not express themselves, now being able to galvanize movements, by mobilizing through the internet. And we've seen how that's really disrupted the government and the state, and their response has been telling in trying to introduce laws and measures that try to prosecute those who may be challenging the status quo and the government, especially in areas that are traditionally securitized, near the Afghan border. I'm talking about areas of Waziristan where there have been theaters of war for so long. And I think technology has really made a central role and played a central role in enabling people to gain a democratic voice. When we saw the rise of Pashtun Tahaffuz movement, we thought, oh, it's just a protest of a few young people from Waziristan. But then what we've seen is young people from that movement contest elections and be able to become members of parliament. And I think I would attribute a lot of that to how the internet really looks at things. Now, secondly, when we come to highlighting abuses and highlighting harassment, I think it's been fundamental. So a lot of women have used the internet to speak up about harassment and about the silence around it, and we saw the Me Too movement really pick up. But then at the same time, we've also seen regulatory tools and laws used to silence those women, right? So is the reaction from this state has been to introduce laws and regulations that really try to take away that power. But then people find other ways of dealing with this. So I think when we consider the democratic nature of the internet, we have to consider that, it may not equalize and it may reflect the class differentials that we have in society. But a lot of times it does also enable people to have a voice that they did not have otherwise. And I think that's very important as to how the government takes that forward. So if we are to be a democratic society, I think that should be harnessed. The feedback that the government and the state is getting regarding governance, regarding its policies through social media and the internet, I think it's great, and it's really important for government to hear that. But the reaction to that should not be knee-jerk. The reaction to that should not be Section 37 of PICA, and the reaction to that shouldn't be the removal and blocking, of online content rules that we're seeing. The reaction should be, okay, tell us what we're doing wrong. Use these tools. Use the Prime Minister's Citizen Portal to give us feedback. And then it's an opportunity for the state to connect with its citizens. So I think that opportunity should really be used effectively by the state rather than acting in a colonial manner that it has in the past centuries. Thank you.
Thank you, Usama. Wes, if you could come in there and maybe talk about, if I can just maybe comment on what Usama was saying. I think it's important to talk about PICA. It's important to talk about Article 37 and what it's done. That regulatory framework has been under discussion for a while. There's been a lot of protest by civil society, etc. But this is a story that is still developing, and we're smack in the middle of it right now. Wes, you've worked on these laws. You've also seen, as Usama said, the nature of a colonial state that is still grappling with technology. It may not be there yet, but in the meantime, its whole impulse towards regulating, over-regulating, criminalizing the internet is something that is deeply disturbing. Do you want to comment on this?
Absolutely. Thank you for, I think Sehar raised a really important example with their experience with the bank. And Usama really mentioned, something that I want to use this as part of a wider discussion on legislation in Pakistan. The digital space is a reflection of what Pakistan is, right? It's just as real. I fully agree with Usama. And just like that, in the digital space, there are people who have a voice, and then there are others who do not have a voice, the marginalized. And what we see really is when it comes to laws, especially criminal laws, especially criminal procedures, these laws are developed and primarily inordinately impact, underprivileged sectors of society. You have 80 to 100,000 people in jails in Pakistan. If you took a class representation from them, they would be predominantly members of the underprivileged class, and that is clear. That is that's what the evidence shows. What we need to understand is that a lot of the changes that need to be done aren't done, or a lot of the ways the laws are made because they don't affect those making those laws, right? It is not done in the sense that this law could one day affect me. This law could one day impact me. It doesn't affect, a lot of our counterterrorism laws, they don't keep the young man in Liari in mind when they're making them, or the young boy in Fata who's exposed to this every day. That's not a reality, even though it is going to impact him far more than it's going to impact a boy who works at a telecoms industry here in Islamabad, or somebody who is the son of an M&A. So these are things that we need to keep in mind. It is not a priority to have laws which are, equally applicable, which stand scrutiny. And I think what this really is, especially with regards to PICA and many of the other rules that have recently come about, this is part of our negotiation as a state, as a community, with what is acceptable, A, in our society, and A, in this modern world that we live in. People are demanding access, and the state is miserably failing at times in being able to deliver that. And I think these are moves that are coming out of panic at times, not understanding that this is how democracy evolves in the modern age. And that's why I think a lot of the problems are coming about. But it's part of this essential negotiation that is taking place within our community. Thank you.
Mubariz, how do you see the PICA negotiations will go? Do you expect the government to relent? Do you think civil society will have a win? Also, if you could lay out some of the major issues that civil society has had with regard to PICA.
We didn't have a win when the act was being passed. Right now, before the first draft of the rules came about, the first whiff of the draft came about earlier this year, they promised broad consultations, and I think we're all aware how those consultations went. They were fairly unilateral for those who are not aware. It's very hard to say how this will be treated, but one thing that I'm sure about is the way the government of Pakistan decides to treat these would really set the path going forward. And it's think of it this way: it's like we're at a crossroad, like a Y intersection. Whether we choose this way or that way, it would really determine how Pakistan progresses, right? The choice is simply between an internet that is safe for all, that is free for all, that is a place where people can express themselves, where businesses can develop, solve problems, or an internet which has arbitrary gatekeepers who can decide who gets to go through, who gets to say what kind of businesses to work, and whoever has gotten through gets to survive and keeps going on to the path. It can be very, very it can set Pakistan back. And we have in the past, let's not forget, we have in the past taken many decisions that have set Pakistan very far back. And I feel like we are again on that path. What really needs to change is that I don't think anyone is denying that there needs to be some regulation of content. Of course, there needs to be regulation of content. But what's really missing in these rules is an intent to keep a check on the regulator, is an intent, or are the systems whereby the regulator who would exercise their discretion, where their discretion is being exercised in a transparent manner, and where the exercise of their discretion is going to be held accountable in a neutral forum. What's really missing is when can the regulator, or under what circumstances can the regulator go ahead and ban platforms, which I feel is the biggest problem right now. So I work for a venture capital firm. We invest in technology-enabled businesses, and what for us a big risk factor or risk premium to Pakistan's existing high risk premium is now around whether this would survive the PTA arbitrary exercise of discretion test, where PTA has now banned games because they were becoming too addictive. I mean, anyone who builds games wants them to be played all the time, and if that is the reason why your game is going to get banned, I don't think we'll be comfortable investing in a gaming company in Pakistan. Again, all this will do, all this broad power given to a very few individuals who, if we just look at the composition of that regulator as well, it's very binary. I don't think you'll find a lot of diversity over there. All that discretion to a regulator like that it conveys the fact that the government of Pakistan is not serious about how important this is not serious about, or does not seriously understand the potential that this has. Like, Just to give you an example of recent TikTok and this band in Korea, BTS alone contributed $3.4 billion to the South Korean economy last year. That's a huge amount, right? We our remittances are around that much, which we love so much. Again, there are huge industries in there, and in internet, right? Like I think we rightly established, is not good or bad. It's just an enabler, and these industries are really waiting for a safe space to operate in, a certain space to operate in, where they know that anyone cannot arbitrarily exercise their authority. So yeah, I think this decision is extremely important, and either Pakistan will be set back, which is what we look like we're taking the wrong course right now, or I think better sense can prevail, and we can make a system, an environment that works for everybody.
Yeah, talking about the impact of blanket bans there, Sadaf, we banned YouTube for 4 years. We've banned TikTok now. What is the impact of banning these apps? Sehar, I'd like you also to come in and talk about how Pakistan loses potential, how Pakistan's narrative doesn't get out eventually, but more about citizens. I'd like Sehar to answer that first.
Look, I mean, I think Mubariz said it really, really well. Maybe the government doesn't really understand the full. There are 2 points to this. One point is the economic angle, and I think the other point is more sort of like the socio-political angle on this. Now, technology is a huge sector for growth and investment globally. People are not just investing in it; people are actually actively looking at ways in which they can promote the technological sector in their countries. Um, we seem to be doing the opposite of that, right? So arbitrary regulation, what that does is not only does it increase regulatory risk, it completely diminishes the appetite for investors to invest, right? Why would any company, why would any investment fund want to invest in a country where their investment could, be at the whims and mercy of just a few people? So I think while we have rightly sort of latched on to this idea that yes, we need to regulate the internet, and there need to be rules of engagement that need to happen, that idea is correct. But we can't look at that in isolation to the rest of the impacts of that regulation. Now, if you're going to pass regulation to regulate content on the internet, but what you're going to end up doing is essentially killing technology companies, killing local commerce, killing local businesses that survive and depend on social media, is that a net positive or a net negative for the economy? So I think people need to think and remember that one legislative lever, when that is pulled up or down, has wide ranging impacts that we need to think about. And I don't think that the government and other stakeholders have really thought through the full implications of what this means. So I think one, we're really at a technologically, I think we're doing our technological sector a lot of harm by passing through legislation that is solving for one problem, but not solving for all the other problems. I mean, the best example I can give is the example of India. Look at what India did 20 years ago. We love comparing India and Pakistan in everything. So let's compare what India did 20 years ago when it came to the technology sector. They said, you know what, technology companies, we would like you to come and invest here. We're going to give you tax breaks. We're going to give you free land to build out your campuses and your presence in the country. We're going to not put any bad regulation on you. Come here, invest here, do your thing. And as a result, what we saw over the last 20 to 30 years is India becoming a technological hub where all big international technology companies now have heavy investments and a heavy presence in India. They invest in the country, they invest in the local resources. But that happened because India created an enabling environment. We're trying to restrain the environment before we have even enabled it. And I think that would be a net negative. And then quickly a point on, I think Pakistan is very, very eager to correct its image abroad. And I think that's one of the big policy imperatives that the government has, that citizens have, that anyone who's linked to Pakistan has, right? We want to show people the true face of Pakistan, that it's diverse, that it's wonderful, it's warm, it's welcoming. Well, how do you do that if international platforms are banned? How can local influencers, local businesses, local content creators get word out about Pakistan if those forums can't exist in Pakistan? So I think our best commodity, I think, has always been, and our strongest selling point has always been the warmth of our people, the vibrancy of our culture. And the best way to showcase that to the rest of the world is through technological platforms. So let them flourish. Let people say and speak and show the world the wonderful things that they are doing. And it is my request to, everyone watching, that first let's try to enable people before disabling their access and rights.
I hope government officials are listening and other actors are listening, but let me rephrase a little bit. Sadaf, does the security state really care about bona fide showcasing of Pakistani talent or tourist spots? Does the security state not very often rely on private actors to do, its bidding? We have had lobbyists sort of who presenting a certain vision or view of Pakistan, and that's gone wrong. Sehar mentioned India as well. Both of us face off as security states, and both of us are creating an environment where genuine voices are being stifled, genuine voices that can create alternative narratives. How do you see the technology will fare with the security state that doesn't have a very charitable view of alternative narrative?
I think you're being kind by saying there is not a charitable view of alternative narratives. I think there is no space for real Pakistani narratives either. What we see online, specifically, let's say on Twitter, with all the trending hashtags and whatnot, and these foreign travel bloggers, influencers, etc., that's a very constructed narrative. And what I find both funny and sad is that the audience always seems to be within Pakistan. So you are essentially trying to convince your own people of the image of a country that doesn't really exist. We don't exist in that country, because if this is happening for people who are based out of Pakistan, then we'll see a very different kind of narrative being pushed. Telling women, for example, that hitchhiking from one place to another is completely safe while the motorway rape case is going on. Stuff like that, that doesn't really sit well, and that's not going to go out of the country. It's just going to create, or let's say it's being done to kind of release the pressure that's now building up on people and on the state to improve its own services, to get its act together. I think one of the when Sehar was talking about how India has responded to the internet, I was thinking of one of the key issues that I feel misinformed the government's perspective and the state's perspective often. I feel that the state tries to see the internet as something which is a local industry. So when we talk to people, let's say sitting in the IT committees, the sense that I get is that they're treating the broadcast industry and the print industry and the internet, and they're seeing it with the same lens. Now this is this is a very basic flaw in the understanding that has to be tackled with, which they're not ready to engage with. A media industry, the newspaper industry, they're regulated commercial industries, and they obviously operate like industries. The internet, on the other hand, is not really an industry. It doesn't just have commercial giants, doesn't just have technological giants. It also has you and me, and it's a space that kind of extends our own public space, the citizens public space, to the virtual sector. So the internet replicates everything that's going on in our physical spaces. There are businesses, there are commercial interests, there are issues, there are crimes taking place on the internet, there are industries using the internet. Just as you have an office of Geo or whatever channel you have in the physical space, you'll have a presence online as well. So to treat these industries and the internet as an industry that simply is being used to push narratives out, that's really restricting and limiting the approaches that the government has taken. We have seen a huge focus on regulation. However, if you look at the internet, the kind of regulatory issues that are not being discussed, they go well beyond what content is being put on. I was recently looking at all these women only groups where people share, reviews of commercial services that they're using. And I've noticed that during COVID, where a lot of things have gone online, the shopping and retail have gone online, there are lots of scams going on. Just yesterday, I was looking at somebody, a number of people who had posted, who had brought some stuff from a new and upcoming brand page, whatever, and they had been advertising a lot, and the number they gave actually belonged to some laborer, and they all got some packages, paid the money, and so if you had ordered a coat, a jeans came out of it which was torn, and when you call the number, you get connected to a laborer. These are things, and these are scams that are actual financial scams that are happening. And frankly, I'm even afraid to say this, because the second I think about, this needs to be regulated, I know that this is going to be twisted somehow into regulating the content rather than regulating the issue that we are talking about. So we don't even talk about it. You will not hear civil society talking about very basic consumer rights issues that are genuine, that are happening, both at the ends of customers, both at the end of businesses that are flourishing online. But we are so scared that the skewed view of seeing the internet and regulation as being completely content related, that we are not really talking about these issues, and these issues do affect how people actually experience the internet. Now we were talking about pika, and one of the sections in pika that is here hugely problematic is section 10 that deals with cyber terrorism. And like, just think about, what Pakistan has been through. When you think about terrorism, you think actual terrorist activities or radicalization that is actually being done for recruitment. But if you look at the wording and framing of cyber terrorism, you'll find that this is also linked to how people are expressing themselves, what they're talking about, what they're not talking about, in broadly defined sentences. So you have the opportunity to, you have essentially the risk of attracting a terrorism charge if you're just being vocal and critical of the government, or critical of decisions that they have been taking. So when this approach is taken, then obviously what we're talking about, actual connectography, actual progress, actually interlinking of technology within the government structure, state structure, that doesn't happen. And the thing is, it doesn't stand to have a bad impact. It's already having a bad impact. We are in the information age. Information economy is not a thing of the future. It's the thing that's happening today. So with these kind of legislations, with these kind of regulations, and the kind of regulation that are coming through the Interior Ministry, let's say, that are very rooted in securitization of the state, I think we stand to lose. We are losing, and this kind of extends to not just the let's say software or the content that we are putting on. Look at the duties that we are putting on import of technological goods. India has a huge content based economy. Their YouTube channels, they're making more money than the Bollywood stars are collaborating with YouTube stars. How can we do that when even buying one camera means I'll pay 3 times what it's advertised for on Amazon, because of the money we have, then I'll have to pay the duty, and then still I don't have the guarantee that what I have paid for will arrive, because the custom people might just keep it there and extort more money. So if these are a law, so what I'm trying to say is not just regulation of the internet, it's regulation of the whole business industry that's coming together to affect how we kind of experience the digital technology, and how we are able to contribute or not able to contribute to the digital economy that's building globally. We are being left behind, and unless there is a drastic shift in the way people are thinking who are in power, I think we will continue to be left behind. We will become isolated.
Sorry, and just one other quick point I wanted to add. I think Sadaf has
Sure.
correctly pointed that it's the whole ecosystem, right? Like, think about the investments that we're making in technological education. The IITs in India are globally famous. Top CEOs for all top tech companies in the world have come out of India. Many of the top tech leadership globally comes out of those IITs, right? So the investment in technology has to go much, much deeper. And I think actually investing in, and the returns won't be tomorrow, by the way. This is a long term play. India started doing this 20, 30 years ago to get to where it is now. And if Pakistan wants to reap the benefits, we need to do this now. I mean, where is the investment in technological education? Where are the scholarships for people wanting to study, AI, wanting to study design, wanting to study, machine learning? Where is the faculty? Where are the universities? Where are the programs, the investments? Right now, our technological syllabi are quite outdated. What is it that we're teaching kids in universities? We have LUMS and we have NUST and a few of these centers of excellence that are producing, good computer scientists. But that's not all that we need. This is a much bigger ecosystem, a much bigger place, and has much bigger potential. And one of the other areas where I would urge the government to make more investments is in technological education. mm, and not just very narrowly focused on computer science, but the broader technological ecosystem. Even, like lawyers, where are the lawyers that are studying technology and society and technology and the law? So I would like to request through this forum greater investments in technological education across the board.
So, Sehar and everybody else, I'd like to ask whether the government is the only actor that we have to make requests to. Usama, do you think we can circumvent the government in any way? Sadr seems to think we're losing because of the government's action or inaction, or even the state, the posture that it has towards technology. Can citizens, can societies circumvent their governments in reaching that potential? And this is certainly not a question just for Pakistan. I think if we are searching for models and comparisons, then perhaps India is not the ideal kind of sort of goalpost to look at, because as you have all pointed out, it started its action 20 or even 30 years ago to reach this position of takeoff. Can we circumvent the government in reaching our potential, as well as any other recommendations you might have for people in positions of authority? Usama?
So I have a very relevant analogy here. There's a lot of content censorship that happens in Pakistan, and consumers and users such as ourselves, we try to circumvent that through VPNs. But what does the government do? And now it started to ask people to register their VPNs, right? So no, it's not possible or easy to circumvent the government, because the government is so interventionist, especially when it comes to technology and regulations. I have one example, like 3D printers are super, super important in this day and age, especially in the tech sector and otherwise. But Pakistan has banned 3D printer imports. And you need to get a specific NOC, and you need to go through all these processes just to import one. So how are you supposed to use technology or the tools that it offers you if the government is making every step of the way so difficult? Similarly, if you look at the prices of mobile phones and the taxes that are imposed on those, right? It just makes it a lot more difficult. And you have to register your IMEI number with the government, and if you don't, it's going to get blocked. So every step of the way, there is some regulation that's trying to slow things down in this country. And I think that's where the solution lies, right? Is realizing that it's not possible to keep doing that and expect your country to progress. But maybe the government isn't the one that's making these decisions, or maybe they're not well informed, and maybe there's not enough qualified people that are informing these decisions, and there's a major generational gap in understanding how technology works and what the potential is. But I think there needs to be a push against that, because at the end of the day, then where do we go? Right? Or what is the future that we're looking at in 10 years? Where do we want the people who are teenagers now to be? And I think these are the questions that the government has to consider. So as part of the solutions, I would say that such regulatory or policy making or legislation activities should involve multi-stakeholders, that inform these decisions. And I'm not just saying civil society or academia, but I'm talking about users, I'm talking about students, and I'm talking about technology companies and people who are in this ecosystem who need to really be part of these processes for policies. And I think the PM has a task force in the IT task force, but I've spoken to a few of the members and they're unhappy because nobody listens to them. So I think A, the policy making needs to be a lot more inclusive, and B, there needs to be more accountability. And I think it's something Mubariz and Sehar and Sadaf and Abbas have also touched upon, like accountability of the regulator. Because now especially with the new rules, the regulators, the judge, jury, and executioner, and there's way too much power in that one office. But we also need to consider what is the job of the regulator. The job of the regulator, the PTA, is to give licenses to telecom operators and internet service providers and ensure that quality services are being provided to citizens. Now, are our telecom companies providing quality services? I barely ever use normal calls. I just use WhatsApp calls simply because the quality of connectivity is so bad, even in large urban centers, that you can't really listen the other person on the phone. But is the regulator ensuring that that improves, which is their job? No, the regulator is busy trying to figure out which tweet should be reported to Twitter and then threaten them with a block because they're not listening to them. So such behavior then obviously shows you what direction really the tech sector seems to be going in. The second recommendation, to cut it short, is to focus on quality of services that are being provided. And then thirdly, I would say increase access, repeating my point earlier, use the Universal Service Fund to really increase this access. Fourth, the government has a research at the IT research and research and development wing. And I think telecom operators are also contributing a major chunk of their revenue there. But what innovation or what investment are we seeing, right? So there needs to be more software technology parks, there need to be more incubators, and the government has been going in that direction, to give credit where it's due. They've set up incubation centers in most of the provincial capitals. They are encouraging that sort of innovative thinking, but they're not encouraging that in the universities. So going back to where Sehar, her point about investing in technology education and that curriculum that connects your students with the sector rather than just textbooks that are outdated. So these are just a few things that I can think of at the top of my head. But yeah, we need to open up the sector and we need to open up the economy rather than trying to over-regulate it and make people suffocate and leave the country, which we're seeing a major brain drain because of such policies. So that really needs to be stopped.
Yeah. Wes, would you like to come in and give your recommendations for official stakeholders to improve governance in tech?
No, absolutely. And I think, the question that you'd asked previously, that can we bypass the government to be able to make changes? I think that's exactly what we've been struggling to do in Pakistan for so long. But you have a spectrum. You have governments that provide an enabling environment, or you have governments that are indifferent to how technological evolution takes place, or you have governments that are actively hindering technological improvement in a country. And from the discussion that we've had today, and I think what we've seen around us, we can see where Pakistan stands, where the government stands, and that is what really the worrying aspect is. You had also spoken about the issue of the security state. I think the biggest threat that technology has is the fact that issues of accessibility allow people to have a voice, which is very difficult to control. This issue of loss of control, loss of being able to manage things, is something that is deeply concerning to these issues and these entities. And that is really where you see, from that position, regulation coming about, which is so oppressive, and all of these issues happening. So I really think that what we need is for Pakistan to get out of that mentality where you feel like you have old uncles running, making the policies, who don't really understand technology, and really getting into looking at this as a whole of government approach, looking at this as a way to propel Pakistan into the future, and stop being afraid of what's inevitable. Really, I think that's really the approach that we need to take, and start accepting what's there for this young generation of Pakistanis that are just coming into the understanding the reality of life here. So I think those are really my few recommendations that I would.
Mubariz, Wes has pointed to a generational shift. Old uncles making policies who don't really get how technology works and who will not get it should this be left to them in the long term. What values do you think technology and the overall tech sector needs to have for this space to be more inclusive, more transparent, and whatever other recommendations you may have for official stakeholders?
Okay, so I think what the fundamental shift in mindset needs to be that we cannot be obsessed with the latest funding provider to Pakistan. So if China is right now our be all and end all, and CPEC, obviously there's a great infrastructure investments and all, but we can't just be inspired by anyone, right? And just try to replicate whatever worked for them. I mean, there's a lot of great things to be inspired by as far as China is concerned. But when we're trying to make policy for Pakistan, the technology policy for Pakistan, it has to be something that works for Pakistan. We can look at so many examples around the world where they have a free and open internet, and it has done wonders for the economy. South Korea, you have Vietnam, and just this Indonesia. There's so many examples. I think that's where we need to look and take inspiration from, and try to regulate the tech sector in Pakistan accordingly. As far as that's my fundamental policy or fundamental advice as far as the governance of technology is concerned. Now, how can technology improve governance generally? If anti-corruption is our big objective, then introduce systems where the discretion given to people is limited, from PTA to even when I'm submitting a form which needs a stamp, which needs me to go through 5 different offices and ask 5 different people to do these little authentications on a piece of paper for me to do that. Those little things, those are low-hanging fruits, which can be very easily addressed by technology, right? And that's where we start from, so that more and more people also take responsibility. I think some good measures have been taken, from digital payments being taxed at a low, say if you pay at a restaurant in Punjab, the tax is lower if you pay digitally. I can name a very famous restaurant in Karachi which does not accept credit cards but has a whole ATM machine installed so that you can pay cash and they can evade tax very easily. And that needs to change, right? And I think people of Pakistan are ready to bring accountability and transparency. It's just that government needs to enable that, and technology is literally what we need as far as documenting the economy is concerned, the limiting corruption is concerned. So the idea is to understand the good that can come out of it, double down on that, and govern accordingly. I think a lot of benefit can be reaped if we really understand what the value is. And again, it can't just be uncles, right? Okay, uncles bring a lot of conventional wisdom. They are there. They understand how the society, a part of the society, works really well. But Pakistan's demographic is unfortunately not just uncle, or fortunately not just uncles, right? We have a very diverse demographic, which I think needs to be heard, and only then we can come up with a policy that works for everyone.
Sadaf, Mubariz has pointed to a very fundamental problem, and that may be our struggle with modernity. Even if you have a younger cohort of people managing their technology, they may display all the immodern or illiberal tendencies that they do on the internet or otherwise, online, offline. What would be your recommendations for both state and society? You did identify a couple of problems. What would be your solutions for them going forward?
Yes, I think the society where we are failing is in building enough public pressure. The society in Pakistan, unfortunately, has lied a lot, has put in all their eggs into, the structured civil society movements. I myself run a non-profit, and I've worked with the development sector for a while. The thing is, the development sector cannot do anything unless the populace, the public, stands behind the sector. And when it comes to regulation, it's not just the internet that's being over-regulated. We are fighting for our existence and our survival. The kind of regulatory mechanisms that are being put in place to put organizations that specifically work on human rights and civil liberties, they are insane. And on top of that, we struggle with the public distrust that happens. So I think on a national level, what needs to happen, starting from university, starting from our homes, I would say, is a discourse on how human rights and civil liberties are not fundamentally opposed to patriotism and security of Pakistan, because this is a narrative that has been built, and this is a distrust that does exist, and often the people have started to see the media and the civil society as something, as agents who are opposed to the progress of Pakistan, who are opposed to the development of Pakistan, and are pushing an agenda that's not the development agenda for Pakistan, but something that's inspired or influenced by some sort of foreign agents. So I think one of my key things is that people who are listening to us, especially students, young people, they need to critically think about these narratives. What is wrong in people asking for their own constitutional rights? What is wrong in people asking for the enabling of an environment which leads to both economic development, social development, which leads to the development of political thought in the country? And development of political thought is never a bad thing. Things develop, people become critical of an ideology, but at least they're engaging with the ideology, and then they come to a space where they're better able to make decisions for themselves and the country. So working on this trust deficit, I think that's one of the most important things. The second thing, I think, at least for people to think about, because I don't think the government is going to ever admit it, is this comparison of what, as you Mubariz was mentioning, China as an ideal, and we keep hearing that China has done this and they have blocked stuff and done this or that. But we also need to be realistic and kind of move away from these delusions of grandeur that we have about where we stand as a country. There are 934 million monthly internet users in China, the highest number in the world. And Pakistan, I think the last I saw on PTA's website was around 87 million broadband subscribers, which is a fraction, like literally 1/8 of what China has. So when your market is not even 1/8 of what literally the biggest digital economy in terms of numbers has, how are you really saying that we will bring in the same sort of restrictions, we will create the same sort of regressive environment, and then yet internet companies will somehow pool in and they will abide by what they're saying, they'll give up their own community standards and abide by our community standards, what we introduce or whatever we arbitrarily introduce. We have nothing to offer at this stage which can be used as leverage to ensure that companies are behaving in that way. So I think one of the reasons that people don't respond to these exaggerations is the fact that they have really bought into this idea that we are a huge digital market who does have leverage and who can convince international tech to abide by our rules. So people do need to start being realistic, specifically the young people, the young internet users, young people who are entering the market. They do need to be realistic about the market that we have and the value addition that we are offering, and then make decisions and make noise about these regulations and what are their asks essentially based on those assessments. So just making those assessments more realistic, I think that will also help people understand that what we are saying is not scaremongering, and what we are saying is not just like we don't like Pakistan or it's not a foreign funded agenda thing that we're saying. It's based on, it's very much based on reality and the numbers and the facts. And I think once that happens, once there is realization that we are unfortunately not in a position to negotiate this relationship that we have with global tech, I think we will see more and more people coming up. And anything that can convince this government is public pressure. Nothing else helps really. So developing that public pressure and for people to understand that this is their rights that are at stakes, So what I'm saying is, stop being dependent on structured civil society movements, stop being dependent on development sector to talk about the rights. People need to talk about the rights, and development needs to happen in a more grassroots focused manner, which is what happened in India as well. There, most of the rights that, the right based movements, they have come from the grassroots. I think we are missing that grassroots movement. The reasons for it, of course, but I think that needs to start happening.
Influencer Sehar Tariq, who's taken to the internet to give voice to her opinions as well as the policy asks of civil society. What are your recommendations for any number of actors out there, including government, official actors, influencers like yourself, and young citizens of Pakistan?
Well, speaking for influencers like myself, I'm not an influencer. But I think one of the interesting things I've done this year as a learning exercise is really look at this space and look at the young people that are operating in this space to see what they're doing. And they're doing a number of really, really interesting, very smart things. Some of them are sort of subverting things like, traditional social norms, etc. When it comes to women's place in society, when it comes to gender roles, when it comes to, so there's all kinds of interesting things that are happening on the internet. But at the end, we have to remember that the internet belongs to all of us, right? It belongs to everyone who is on the internet, who uses the internet, whether it's my dad who checks his Facebook obsessively and compulsively, or whether it's me who's trying to be an internet influencer, whether it's like a technology company that's building a product. The internet belongs to all of us. It's something that is fundamental to how we all lead our lives. It is actually fundamental to governance now. So it's even fundamental to government to use. Government uses the internet, like Usama mentioned, the citizens portal that the Prime Minister has, to crowdsource, complaints about the government to respond to citizen requests. So, given that the internet belongs to all of us, I think we all also need to take responsibility for it. Like Sadaf said, it can't just be civil society, it can't just be government. It has to be all of us at the end of the day. So, I think a couple of things. One, I would like to say for the government, I think Mubariz and Osama mentioned this very well, that we sort of need to end um, the Uncle Raj that exists across government on a number of things, right? We have to make governance more and policy making more inclusive. So include a wider range of voices, a wider age of voices in policy making, and let's make policy making truly consultative. Let's not just make it, that, oh, we heard what you had to say, but we didn't take any of your feedback on board, but we heard what you had to say, right? So hear people and take their feedback on board. So make governance or policy making more inclusive and actually responsive to um, citizen requests and citizen demands. So inclusive and responsive governance, which the government can do, plus investing in the technology sector by actually enabling it. I think before Pakistan can get to a point where it can start demanding or dictating terms, we have to get to the point where we actually have a vibrant and robust enough digital economy, a technological community that can demand sort of these changes. So enable people, welcome people into this space, make it easier for technology companies that are operating in Pakistan or out of Pakistan to come to Pakistan. Make Pakistan a attractive investment destination for technology companies, because we all know this is the future of the economy. In every way, any business or any economy, any economic activity will be linked to technology. So if we can become a center of excellence, an island where technology can thrive, that's how our economy is going to thrive. This means looking at taxes, this means looking at regulation, this means looking at laws that govern technology in Pakistan. And I would say a third thing that I would really like to make a demand for, and I think we often don't talk about this enough, is give more women access to technology. This is actually a very simple thing, but we've seen that when women are given access to spaces, physical or financial or whatever, those spaces, those families, they improve. And I think technology will be no different. When you have more women participating online, being more authentic the way they can, I think the online space will improve. We will have less of the problems that we see now. And connected to that is we do need a greater, broader public service, public awareness campaign around digital literacy, as well as explaining to people the benefits of technology and how to use it for their best selves. And in the end, a shout out to all of the influencers who are on the internet. I would like to say, keep doing what you're doing. You, for the most part, make it a more entertaining space. You make it an educational space. So I think the more creative content we can keep bringing out of Pakistan, we are actually building a better image for Pakistan. We are building better resources for Pakistanis to access. We are building opportunities for local businesses. Honestly, over the last 3-4 months, I have dedicated myself to only purchasing products from Pakistani businesses, because this is a space, like I said, that I've been researching and looking at. And honestly, I have been floored by the quality of products. I have been floored by the quality of customer services offered by local Pakistani brands and businesses. And I have been floored by how smart and funny Pakistanis are, whether they're sort of selling social change or whether they're selling a product. So please keep doing more of that. And the world needs more of this goodness to come out of Pakistan, not less.
Thank you for that, Sehar. We've run out of time on this session, but showcasing Pakistani wellness and goodness is perhaps one of the exports we have overlooked so far. I don't mean to lapse into a roundup of what was discussed. We've run out of time for that, but I think Pakistan is navigating globalization as much as it is navigating change and narratives within. How it showcases these and what it puts out is really something we will see in the years to come, and possibly next year as Pakistan makes its way out of the pandemic and learns better ways of utilizing and harnessing the internet. I thank all of you, practitioners, thought leaders, experts in your fields, agitating policy angles as you do, being activists. The 16 days of activism are upon us. So invite all of you to undertake your activism with us, and for the Jinnah Institute to be able to do its policy work. Thank you for giving us time, and thank you for giving the internet time. Thank you very much. Khuda Hafiz.
Thank you.